By June 2003, more than a month after the president's mission accomplished speech, the company finally made it to Babylon, the first modern city in the world and their final destination. They set up camp, and the upper echelon of the company requested a tour of historical Babylon. Sami was taken along as the major's driver, and he was less astonished by the city's amazing history and more at how wide-eyed and eager the officers were, asking all kinds of questions of their Iraqi tour guide. Their deference and respect for an Iraqi surprised Sami. Sami's company immediately settled into their base, one of Saddam Hussein's palaces. This wasn't a storybook castle. It was more like a gated community, a series of buildings on a huge plot of verdant land. The unit went to town. For months they'd had no showers, no toilets, and only packaged food. They felt less than human. Now they had a swimming pool. They had volleyball courts. They had electricity, cots, and tents to sleep in. Showers so long they could feel clean again and re-enter the world of the living. Life actually became routine at the palace. After a few days, the schedules were set. Sami worked from 8 to 4, and after 4 p.m., his time was again his own, just like at 29 Palms. The company set up a makeshift gym in the palace. After work, they either exercised or hung around, as fear was slowly replaced by boredom. They were getting restless. There was nothing else to do, and the war was supposed to be over. To break up the tedium one day, a unit in the company left the base for a tour of another of Saddam's palaces that was nearby. Sami went with his commanding officer, but the entire company soon joined in. As soon as they arrived there, the Marines began acting like little kids, running through the palace and screaming to hear their own echoes. They climbed on top of the diving board and looked down upon the dirty pool. The afternoon was a bizarre kind of stress release, a free-for-all like nothing Sami had ever seen before. They began removing things, taking stuff, furniture, fixtures, anything they could get their hands on. They pillaged the guts out of the complex. Anything that moved right into their hands. It worked for a day, but after the palace visit, the boredom and stress and frustration returned and increased. Leaving became the only acceptable topic of conversation. They were restless, and the rumors swirled. "When are we going home, sir?" they asked every day. "We go home when we're told to, soldier," was the answer every time. They were young. It was August, and it was hot. They wanted to hug their parents and make love to their girlfriends or wives. They could think of nothing else. Finally, in early September, the commanding officers announced that they could expect to leave within a week. Everyone hooted, hollered, and hoo-hawed, but nothing happened. Then 2 more weeks passed, and still nothing. They were told they had to wait for the army to come in and take over the area, and they began resenting the army. Then Marine infantry units began departing. Until after a while, only a small group of Marines was left, all of them in communications. Communications had to stay back to help the army with the transition. Finally, at the end of September, Sami got the word that he and his friends in communications were leaving, and home became real and not just an abstract noun signifying desire. They couldn't stop smiling and started talking about what they were going to do first thing when they arrived. For Sami, that was easy. Eat chicken Alfredo at Olive Garden. The day of departure finally arrived, and they packed up their gear and drove to the airstrip. They boarded a transport plane for Kuwait, and then changed to a commercial airliner for JFK. On board, Sami tried to sleep, but couldn't. He had 2 CDs that he listened to over and over again while thinking about his last 30 weeks. His tour really had finished, and it had turned out just fine, meaning that he was alive. 8 months earlier, he had left 29 Palms, scared and worried. Now he had discovered that he was actually a pretty good Marine. He regretted trying to get out of his service. In the brutal landscape of war-torn Iraq, he had begun to connect to his Arab side, and he had never felt more like a New Yorker. They closed off a wing of JFK so the soldiers could change planes for their return to 29 Palms. When they arrived in California, they were met right off the plane by one of the soldiers' girlfriends, who brought them all Marlboros and Budweisers to celebrate their return. Everyone reached for an American cigarette and grabbed a cold can of American beer. They looked at one another, goofy smiles splashed on their faces, and toasted one another and themselves on the tarmac. The cigarettes and the beer tasted like life. "It was like champagne to us," Sami said.